Hey everybody, my name's Alex and this is Bento Radio. Now before we get started, just the standard stuff to get out of the way. First, if you really like this podcast, be sure to scroll down to the box with the words and hit the subscribe button as well as the notification bell that will let you know when new episodes are out and keep you subscribed, which helps the channel obviously. Second, I have an app. I have been an old school anime otaku for decades at this point, and I've always wanted something that didn't just help me track what I watch, but helped me keep my thoughts all in one place. And so I set about doing that. I'm actually going to hold it up to the camera this time round. If you have any interest in maybe checking it out, you can do so with the show's webpage, which is bento-box.ghost.io. That show page again is bento-box.ghost.io. There'll be a link to that site in every place you go looking for it, in the description of this very video, if you're watching it as a video, in the description of this podcast, if you're listening to it on your favorite podcast platform of choice, and in the descriptions of the YouTube channel and of the actual overall podcast. So you can definitely go find it anywhere you're looking for it, and so go check that out. And of course, if you're listening to the podcast and you really love it, be sure to subscribe to it in your favorite podcast app of choice. The other thing I'm going to say, just because of today's topic, this one's probably going to be a little bit of a shorter one and going to be a little bit of an odder one because of what we're talking about. So let's jump into what we're talking about this week, and it's going to get a little interesting because it's a bit of an older one. Actually, the entirety of this show is available, I think, on Internet Archive. You can just go find it. It's not that hard. I might even include a link in the description of the podcast on the website. Once again, that website, bento-box.ghost.io. So you can just go find the damn thing, because I think you should watch it for a bunch of reasons, which we're going to get into. But the OVA that we're talking about today is a little ditty from 1987, that's right, it's super old, called Twilight Q. So take it away,
Twilight Q is a pair of standalone original video animations released in 1987. Right in the middle of the booming OVA era, when studios were experimenting with strange, ambitious ideas that probably never would have made it to television. The first episode follows a young girl who discovers a photograph of herself, except she has absolutely no memory of ever taking it. That small mystery quickly spirals into a much stranger investigation as she begins searching for answers about where the photo came from and what it might mean. The second episode takes a completely different approach. Directed by Mamoru Oshii, who would later become famous for Ghost in the Shell 2, Innocence, it follows a private investigator pulled into a bizarre case that gradually drifts into surreal territory. Like a lot of Oshii's work, the story is less about solving the mystery and more about exploring strange ideas, atmosphere, and unanswered questions.
So, before we jump into Twilight Q and my thoughts on those two episodes, both of which are interesting and not interesting in their own ways and for their own reasons, I do want to talk a little bit about the space that Twilight Q came out in, because I think it's pretty important. And that space is the OVA boom of the 80s into the 90s. Just a little bit of technological history here. The thing that made indie animation distributable in a real way is the VHS. More accurately, probably the Betamax and the VHS, but in the Betamax VHS competition and war for what would be the preeminent platform, VHS won out. In the same way that Blu-ray won out and DVD before it won out. And if you don't know anything about one of the major things that makes that happen, it's actually the adult film industry, in that whichever format they take to is the one that wins. It's the adage of basically the entire technology sector. Is like, if there's a new format specifically for video, the one that the adult industry adopts is the one that will usually win. I don't make the rules. It's been a real thing for a long time. But The thing that VHS allowed to happen was it allowed something to not be on TV. Or not be on TV in a broadcast capacity. Or not be in a theater in a movie showing capacity. In addition to and before that. Before VHS and Betamax happened, you were making things that were going to show on television. Or you'd have straight up film reels. These were the ways people saw stuff. With VHS, with both Betamax and VHS, but for our purposes VHS, that decoupled the requirement for, we made this thing, now we want it to be seen by people, we need to go to these distribution hubs. No, you have a tape made. And so what that did in practice for animation is it uncoupled animation from the requirements of what would become the MPAA, which is the Motion Picture Authority for their people make films either G through NC-17 or X if they want to be really sketchy about it. And television rating, which are rated Y7 for young kids 7 or up kind of thing. Or PG-13 still for whatever. But those rules, once you are pressing something immediately to tape, those rules change and those rules are different. And you can get away with more and you can be more artsy, you can take bigger swings, all of this stuff. In America, that denoted a quality of lesser value because we got into the area of direct-to-video. And there are lots of direct-to-video, a lot of the Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen twin stuff. The stuff that they became famous for was a lot of direct-to-video releases. And there are people who were in nothing but direct-to-video movies. And there is a whole universe of direct-to-video Disney sequels. Well, it didn't get a release, it just came out on video. But it also made things possible like the infamous 1990s white clamshell releases of classic Disney Renaissance animated films like Lion King and Aladdin and you name it. But in Japan, what it allowed for animation, the anime industry, to have a different outlet. And the people producing this were producing stuff in the same era as Studio Gainax was coming up and doing their thing in. And the OVA boom was a boom of different, weird, experimental, and interesting, even if not entirely commercially viable all the time, OVAs. And really the ones that we have now are ones that are at the top of the heap. And if you're like, why is Alex talking about a weird OVA from the mid to late 80s? Well, the reason why I'm talking about it is the reason why I'm talking about Twilight Q is because you may have seen a part of this VA. If you've ever seen really a serial sounding like animation of a plane slowly morphing into a giant koi fish in the sky, you've seen the first couple seconds of the second episode of Twilight Q. And if you're like, what do you mean the first couple seconds? That thing happens with no context. Because the first episode is called Not in Time. The second episode is called Case File 538. Both episodes are disconnected. They are just about the vibe. Not in Time is really this kind of rumination on nostalgia and the deja vu quality that nostalgia can have, even if it makes no sense that it has that nostalgia gives you this warm, comforting feeling of familiarity, even though it shouldn't. And as far as I could tell, Case 583 is just like Mamoru Oshii on his absolute shit. Just it. It is everything that all of Mamoru Oshii's impulses rolled into a thing before he made Ghost in the Shell and somebody edited him. That makes any sense. Or edited him more than they did here in this particular thing at least. Because you see a lot of really familiar shots that you associate with Ghost in the Shell in this. You see a lot of The long pauses, long extended animation cuts, paired with then immediately very limited animation cuts. And it's this whole really unique and thoughtful vibe of a thing. And I have in my notes that the vibe of the second episode really fits Ghost in the Shell Innocence more than it fits Ghost in the Shell, because it has that same feel of Bato being lonely and hanging out in his apartment with his basset hound that you get very directly in Ghost in the Shell Innocence. It's just not a part of the original Ghost in the Shell film. But before we get to that, let's talk about the first one, A Knot in Time. A Knot in Time is, like I said, a rumination almost on nostalgia, and it follows this girl who is snorkeling off a coast in Japan, and she picks up this old camera that fell in the water. It looks like it's been there for a couple of years. But she goes to look, she has the pictures developed, and the pictures on the camera feature a picture of her and a guy she'd never met, and a photo that she doesn't remember being in. And the whole thing starts to feel like they're encountering something otherworldly, especially when the camera just fucking appeared off a table. And the fact that the camera shouldn't exist. Camera is a camera that's too advanced for when they're living. And it's really hard to watch these OVAs like this. It's a lot harder than you realize, because they are oftentimes fan-subbed. These were totally fan-subbed. And they are oftentimes, like, no point to them. Like, these are single episodes, self-contained things that need to start and finish in some way in 30 minutes. So you don't even get... One of my favorite Studio Ghibli films is a film that they did actually for TV called Ocean Waves. And Ocean Waves is like a quiet, urban love story. That's all it's about. That's the only point it has. It's not like this big, grand, imaginary thing, Spirited Away or Princess Mononoke. But what you get from it is you get almost this, like, the experience of watching a vaporwave stream a little bit. You get to just hang out and have a real Iyashike time. And Ocean Waves does that, is by having a theatrical runtime. It's by having just enough time for you to hang out with the film, essentially. I encourage you to go find Ocean Waves and rent it and watch it. It's worth at least seeing once. I've seen it multiple times. I love it. But, obviously, these two things, they don't have a whole lot of time. So they need to tell a pretty condensed story, and they need to get in and out in 30 minutes. And often, not because I'm impatient, but because I'm just wondering where we are in this timeline of things. I'll check the timestamps when I'm watching, and on both of these OVAs, surprised, they were over in what felt like no time, even though it was like I sat there and watched an hour's worth of anime, essentially. And what A Knot in Time is doing is essentially giving you this time travel story that follows this girl who time traveled all the way to 2023 from 1987, and all the way back to 1937 at a point. And also briefly to 1993. And it tells this full circle story centered around that camera, and that's the point. And the point is for you to, the point by the end is really to make you, to crystallize the idea of nostalgia for something that hasn't happened yet. If that makes any sense. Nostalgia for the Marvel movie that hasn't come out yet. And it feels tense and uneasy and odd, but also relaxed. And one thing I want to talk about here, and then I think we should probably cut for a brief second to change the battery because I'm staring at a red battery signal, is that any kind of cultural thing is a product of when it came out and what was happening in the universe in which it came out in. Now, the thing I want to talk about next week came out in the 90s. But the thing that came out now, the thing that we're talking about this week, came out in the 80s and late 80s. Which, if you know anything about Japan at the time, meant that they were about to start a real downward slide. It was about to get real lost decade-y pretty quick. Around the end of the 80s, early 90s. And there was this uneasiness. And both of these OVAs episodes, and for Twilight Q, capture that uneasiness. The uneasiness of sitting alone in your apartment and hearing nothing but reports about planes just up and vanishing. The uneasiness of encountering a photo that you don't remember being in from a time that you don't remember happening. I'm recording this in 2026, and the world is not great. And there's a lot of couching that, and there's a lot of things that are coming out that are talking about that, making things that feel like that. And we started getting probably about last year or the year before, the first wave of things that were talking about the pandemic era, and the era in which lots of people who are just below me in the age range came up, and what they had to deal with, and social distancing, and all that stuff. And you look at stuff from the pandemic era, and there's a real tension there. That the tension of the time when Twilight Q was made is very much in both episodes of the show. Now, this episode is better than Case 583. And Not in Time is better than Case 583, but it's less interesting for a key reason I'll get to in a second. But it's better because it's just a tighter story. It's a tighter, more interesting, aware story that pulls a bunch of twists and tricks along telling itself over the 30 minutes. But it feels technically less restrained, taking bigger swings in terms of animation budget and all that stuff, because these things are essentially art house short film put to tape oftentimes, and these even more so. But Case 583, the second of the two OVAs in Twilight Q, is not as good as the first one, but for my money, more interesting, because directed by Mamoru Oshii, the infamous director of a lot of stuff, but probably most famously, Ghost in the Shell. Both Ghost in the Shell 1 and Ghost in the Shell 2, Innocence. I talked about it a little bit already, but so much of what this OVA is and what it feels like is almost like a test run for what he would do with Ghost in the Shell, both the first and second movie. In that you see a lot of very familiar shots, you see a lot of very familiar stylistic choices. Like I said earlier, if you've seen anything from Twilight Q, you've probably seen this beautiful animation of this jumbo jetliner transforming into a massive koi fish in the sky. And that happens first thing. It happens fully first thing. An odd but good and very nerdy touch, is that the jetliner is a Japan airline, is a JAL airline, and the pilots are speaking English when you hear the pilots talking initially. It's a nice touch that's attention to detail. I guess got the rights for Japan Airlines. Japan Airlines may have paid some amount of budget to make this thing. And it's the first thing that happens. Which to me says that you didn't need to do a ton of digging. That makes any sense? So much of A Knot in Time is, like I said, better than the second episode. But none of it is as striking as a commercial airline turning into a koi fish. It just isn't. And like I said, I keep saying, A Knot in Time is worth your time to watch. They're both worth your time to watch because they're old and interesting and weird. And like I said, essentially art house rumination pieces in the form of anime from the 80s. It's a good time. But there's nothing in that film that grabs you in the way that moment at the opening of the second episode does. But hilariously, what happens immediately after is you are shunted into a one-room apartment of a private investigator who may or may not be going slowly insane. And his daughter? A young girl who's wearing an army helmet and is just slowly going down a rabbit hole of a case he's working on. The particular don't super matter, and I also don't want to spoil them, but they don't super matter. What does matter is shot composition, the framing, narration, the vibes of the thing are fully like you're here for a Mamoru Oshii time, for lack of a better term. But what I was going to say was, it's all kind of this interesting, slightly pained, bizarre soup. And like I said, the OVA boom happened at a very particular time. It was anime's first attempt at taking off. And it would eventually get there. Once in the 90s and then majorly in the mid-aughts, and then now it's a totally normal thing for people to watch anime. When I was coming up, it wasn't. When I was coming up, I distinctly remember someone saying to me, well, it's cool when you're reading manga in class. I'm like, what do you mean? I'm reading the same shit, if not more insane shit, than my other otaku friends are. Why are you giving me this cachet? I don't deserve it. But it's this, there's something that's lost when a medium goes wide. And the thing that's often lost is the experimentalness of it. One of the coolest things that I find watching the current season of JJK is that it's just experimental. Like the team at MAPPA in charge of the green light to do whatever they want. Yes, they have a story they have to follow. Yes, they have a thing they're adapting. But other than that, it seems like they can do what they please. They can make weird an episode that's just a weird homage to the Kill Bill Crazy 88 fight. For just the reason they want to. They could have picked myriad other ways to do that. And what you think of that is what you think of that, but they're taking a real experimental, playful stab at things that lots of stuff doesn't get to do or doesn't bother doing. Or does in such small ways that blinking you'll miss it. Stuff that's happening in JJK this season is not blinking you miss it. It smashes you in the face immediately with what it's referencing. And the result is that people really enjoy that stuff. People probably enjoy it a lot more than certainly the previous seasons, which are already excellent. But there's a lot of other stuff out right now. You look at a different side of the coin, you look at Sentenced to be a Hero, and Sentenced to be a Hero is so much of a otaku bait show, done so well, that people are like, this is the coolest thing this season. And then it sits there and you're like, but it's the coolest, it's one of the coolest things this season. It's just also just one of the coolest things this season. What do you do with that? Surprise, the cool thing continues to be cool. I think now that, at least I hope, now that we've gotten so big, now that we've achieved a level of polish in anime that didn't used to be there, now that that's out of the way, we can start to get back to what do we do with this medium? What can we do here that we can't do elsewhere? What conversations can we have? What can we meditate on something like nostalgia culture? Can we meditate on something like paranoia or any of the stuff that's being looked at in Twilight Q? And maybe get stuff in front of people that's like, hey, this is a cool, weird thing. It's from the people who made the thing you like. Please watch it. If you have any interest, like I said, and probably when I'm going to end it, but if you have any interest in Twilight Q, you can find it over on the Internet Archive. I am actually going to leave a link in the description wherever you're listening or watching this, so you can go check that out. You don't have to, I downloaded it because I've added it to my collection, but you don't have to download it. You can simply sit there and stream it and watch the damn thing. It's worth your time. It's super weird. If you have any love for Mamoru Oshii or his work or Ghost in the Shell in particular, I highly recommend you at least watch the second episode. You don't need to watch them in order. The first episode, like I said, if you like things like Ocean Waves or you want something like, that has a little bit of a Millennium Actress quality to it, I would definitely give A Knot in Time the time of day. Pun intended, apparently. And so that's where I'm going to leave it. It says it's probably going to be a little bit shorter than normal because it is 2-episode OVA. So, hey, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. And if you did, be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. If you're listening to it on a podcast platform and they allow you to give a 5-star review, be sure to do that. If you're watching this on YouTube and you really liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and like the video. In addition, if you want to make sure that you don't miss a beat, be sure to hit that notification bell so you know when new episodes drop. But if you're wondering, they drop every Thursday night Eastern time. And on that note, if you really love the podcast and you really love what I'm trying to do here, be sure to give the website a look. That website is bento-box.ghost.io. There will be a link in the description of either this podcast or this video. It'll also be linked in the description of the entire podcast on the information page. It'll also be linked in the description of the YouTube channel. So there's plenty of ways for you to get to that website and check it out. If you want to follow me, my social links are also listed in the footer of that page. So once again, go over there to find that stuff. But I hope you like the episode. I look forward to talking to you next time. But until next time, I have been Alex. This has been Bento Radio, and I'll talk at you later.